The wall sighed in its sleep, a sound like distant surf, though there was no sea here. Only the blue-white cliff, brooding and cold, and the long weight of winter pressed against it like a giant's hand. Jon Snow stood with Ghost at the edge of the old King's Road and watched the frost smoke drift from the black mouth of the tunnel. Dawn had not found them yet. Night had thinned to iron, and along the high face of the wall the east began to glow the pale of a hunter's moon drowned in milk. When he drew breath, the air cut like a honed knife. Ghost's fur crackled with ice where mist had kissed him. The direwolf's eyes were red coals in the charcoal light. "I always thought it would topple one day," Tormund Giantsbane said beside him, snow in his beard and laughter in his voice, though there was no laughter in the day. "Great old thing like that. No living thing stands so long. The world changes and ice breaks, but it stands yet. I've pissed on enough of it to know it's not stone." "It's not meant to fall," Jon said. "It's meant to stand. That's a thing men say when they love a thing, and hope is all that holds it up." Tormund's beard twitched. "Who holds you up, Crow?" No one, Jon might have told him, if he were the sort of man to say the true shape of his emptiness. He put his gloved hand to Ghost's neck instead, felt the life under the fur, the steady thrum and warmth. "Not a crow any longer." "Ah, an exile then. Exiles and kings, your Southron sorts are always renaming men and calling it justice. I'll call you Jon, as I have, as I will." Tormund spat, a star of ice hardening on the packed road. "The folk are waiting, beyond the empty crofts that once had fed black brothers and swallowed their bones, beyond the huts with stooped roofs like old men and the low dry stone walls just poking through the snow crust. 2,000 free folk had gathered. They stood in thickets and kinks and sprawls, a moor of people, sagas wrapped in fur, raw life red-cheeked and wind-bitten, the smell of tallow and wood smoke and sweat and leather. Sledges creaked. A child cried and then hushed. A woman in sealskin smiled with teeth broken and gold-capped. An old man with tattoos like runes down his jowls leaned on a spear so barbed it looked sprung from a thorn bush. Their breath was a single low cloud moving over the white. There were fewer than there had been when they had first gone north, after the battle that the minstrels called the Long Night and the Northmen spoke of only with shrugs and a glance toward the woods when the night fell, as if shadows listened for who named them. More had gone on, to the true free lands where the ice and stone stretched to nothing and the sky was all. More had died. More had married with the last hearths of hunters who would never bend knee to the south, not when the stars were their liege and the wind their chaplain. But 2,000 was an army if it wished to be. It was also a people. Jon had walked among them the night before, without fur or sigil, with the dire wolf ghosting at his heels, and heard the hearts in their throats, the hunger, the fear of the south worse than any winter. The Kneeler's land remembers, the free folk told one another around fires. It remembers our raiding. It remembers knives in the dark and girls taken and sheep gone. It remembers us laughing. It has not forgiven. Jon remembered too. You could not peel past from a man as if it were a patch of scab. Scar upon scar. That was the truth of life. Some scars made you weaker. Some knit the wound so you were stronger than before. Was the gift a wound? It had been given, taken, neglected, starved, encroached, petitioned, fought over, dreamed upon, and it had fed the watch until it had not. Now it must feed more. "You can still turn back," he told Tormund without looking at him. "Back to what? To snow and nothing and a cold that eats a man's bones out of him like a white worm." Tormund snorted. "You speak Southron. I speak truth. Back means no. Forward means maybe. And I fancy maybe more than I fancy no." They were not the only men on the road. A handful of black brothers stood by the tunnel, hard-eyed and hollow from lean winter and long duty. Their faces were hard for men so young. There was a time Jon could have named them. He knew one. A spare man who looked surprised at his own stoop was all that remained of the old garrisons at the Shadow Tower and East Watch. The rest were green soot hosed by winter. The Watch would not bar them. They had no food to spare and needed what might be bought from any man who could trade. But even acceptance can be a kind of sword. Lord Snow, the spare man with the stoop, had lost 2 fingers. and the wind worried the black cloth where they should have filled the glove. "My lord." He said it with a bleak smile, as if the word were a joke between them. "You know our quarrel. The gift is ours by gift. Brandon's old and Jehari's is new. We've not held it, and that's a shame on us. We could not even hold our own. That shame sits with us, but it's ours. It was given to you to keep the wall," John said. "These folk will keep it in their fashion." He drew a parchment from inside his cloak. The wax seal, already cracked from the cold and unloved opening his fingers had managed at Winterfell. The paper was heavy, creamy, perfumed faintly with the herbs of the glass gardens. A woman's scent, a lady's ink. By writ of the Queen in the North, Sansa of House Stark. Read it. Keep it if you like. The man's eyes moved, and John knew him calculating how many of his brothers might read such a hand. One of the young ones stepped forward with fingers dirt-cracked but careful. He read in a low voice, and as he read, the cold wind fluttered the parchment so the words trembled like the air. The Queen acknowledged the Watch's ancient rights. The Queen acknowledged the Watch's necessity. The Queen declared the new gift to be under Stark protection and law, with the Watch to be sustained by a tithe in kind levied upon any man who worked its fields or trapped its forests, be he Kneeler-born or freeborn over the wall. The Queen empowered Jon Snow, sworn brother released from duty by royal mercy for service in a war beyond reckoning, to act as the crown's steward in the new gift and to see those laws enforced. The Queen promised grain from White Harbor stores to see the first planting done and the first winter survived. The Queen ended with a Stark's words, not the words of a law. Where the North shelters you, shelter the North in turn. The spare man's throat bobbed. She has her father's hand for saying much with few words. He looked at John, and in his eyes there was something like sorrow. "I was a boy when I took the black. I have always wished to be a man who hungers for glory. I do not. I hunger for bread and for my brothers not to die for want of a loaf. If a free man's corn will keep Castle Black from becoming a cairn, then I will bless his field. You and your free folk, you will tithe. 10 of 100. 10 of 100, and none shall be turned away from the soup if his feet are northward and his eyes are empty." We hammer the seal below her words, if you wish. We've wax yet. One more seal to make us feel we are not lost. "It will do," John said. "It may not," Tormund muttered. "It will do today," John said, and that was as much as any man could say without lying. They moved to the crofts before noon, when the light took on that clean, hard clarity winter sometimes had, the way it polished the edge of things until even your thoughts could cut you. John had chosen the first holding carefully, an old holding seldom troubled even in the years the Watch sent men to harry the squatters. Mudgeon's Tumble, men had named it once, because the dry stone walls had always fallen no matter how stoutly they stacked them. The fields were small but lying upon a swell that would catch what sun there was. A copse of beech stood hunched beyond one field with a blackened lightning scar through the largest tree's trunk. And there was a well, lined with stone, still ice-slick but sweet below. The free folk spread like meltwater, finding the shape of the place. They set up tents where the snow lay deeper and stacked the first windscreens of woven willow. They raked the snow from the field so you could see the furrows ghosting beneath where a man with oxen had once labored in the short summers. A woman with a baby tucked against her breast took a knife to the old fence and cut neat lengths to make a fire. A boy with hair the color of ash shoulders, small and thin as a skinned willow, led a pair of half-wild goats by a rope that looked more knot than cord. He moved slowly, as if at any sudden motion the goats would remember they were goats and defy him. John watched. He was not building, not yet. A Stark builds by ordering. It was not wrong. A chieftain builds by standing until others gather about and stand also. He stood. Men watched him as they worked and took a measure from his stillness. Ghost lay in the snow and sometimes breathed out long so the air smoked from his mouth as if he were some little volcano under the fur. "They'll need meat," Tormund said. "And not all of them know how to take it and leave the bones so the woods give more. I sent riders to the lakes," John said. "Hooks and lines will work where arrows are scarce." "Arrows are never scarce when they're earned," Tormund said, but grunted approval. Later, as the light fell and drew long blue shadows from the half-mended walls. One of the tents threw a bigger shadow than it should. Val stepped out with the dusk like a ghost of it, wrapped in a mantle of white fox that fit her like snow fits a hill. There were silver rings on her fingers, and her hair was braided with strips of red cloth that moved like tongues of fire at the end of each plait. She was tall with her boots and her chin lifted. Her smile was small and knife-curved. "You brood as if brooding will lay eggs," she told John. "What eggs do you expect to hatch? Chickens with swords." "Children," John said. "Children with bread. Bread is a kneeler's word. I prefer meat that bites back in the mouth." "You'll have both if the river thaws in time," John said. "If not, we'll have soup, and the watch will have soup, and I will think about meat while we drink it." Val Loked. She had a laugh that reminded him of icicles striking stone and shattering to ringing shards. "My sister would have liked you. Dalla." She liked men who had to pretend they were not bleeding to bleed properly, and men who could speak simply and not say half the truth with the other half. "She would have made you our king." "I have been a king more times in songs told by men I do not believe than I have in halls," John said, and then, because the blue day was falling to black and the old beach shivered and the wall sighed, he added soft, "I liked your sister. I like you. I will not call myself king. I will call myself steward because that is what I am. I hold this place so that it might belong to others later. That's stewardship. Is that a thing?" Val looked upwards as if the word hung there for her to judge its fitness among the stars. "To hold for later? Your kneeler laws are a pile, Jon Snow. But this I like. To hold for later and not keep for yourself, that I know. That's what a mother does. Fine. If you must be mother to these men, I will be their teeth. Sometimes mothers need teeth." In the morning there were tracks. John woke on old straw in an old byre, stiff with the cold that crept up from the stone through the leather and wool until it found the ache in the bone that had never left him since the night he died, and rose again with nothing of the boy he had been. Ghost's head was near his, as if the dire wolf would breathe for him if he forgot to. He rolled and went out in the dawn, drawn by the sense something was wrong as one is drawn by a scent of smoke in a forest. There were tracks, the small scrim of fox, the print of goat, and a heavy, purposeful line of men's feet moving west along the low ridge, keeping low as prudent raiders do. The prints had crosshatching at the heel where iron had bitten snow. Not free folk boots, then. John did not think. A man plans, and he had planned this. The night watches at the east and west of the croft, the signal horns, the lines of escape should a larger force come and make too much ruin. But his body moved as if it were Ghost's body, in the old and familiar silence. His hand finding Longclaw's grip without thinking about the sheepskin wrapping he had brought over from Winterfell to bind the patterned leather he had loved too much in a boy's vanity. Tormund joined him with 2 of his sons, and a long, thin woman named Hela Blackthumb who could twist wire and fix a broken leather thong with the same patience she had for men. They fanned and went quiet. The tracks were so clear a man could have counted the nails in the boots by how they marked the snow. 7 men, 1 light, 1 limping. 7 is the gods' number, John thought, and then wondered why to think of gods when all the gods he'd known had been yard-tall carved weathered things and the weirwood faces, white as frost, whose eyes bled red. 7 men. What god would that please? None of the old ones. They found the men at the old sheepfold on Flint's Rise, which in summer would have been a slope of switchgrass and thorn, but now was only the wind and the old fold and the men. They had come poorly hidden, which meant they were either very brave or very certain. They were no great company, either, men in patched wool and leather, with a shield painted with old flayed men now whitewashed and a new sigil scrawled there. 3 slashes, quick drawn, a boy's mark. They were winter wolves of no house and no lord, the sort who hunt in hard seasons under a name today and another name tomorrow until the thaw sends them to the trees to hang like the old debts they are. John stood with Longclaw unsheathed, the sword's pale edge catching the weak sun. He said, "You are 10 miles inside the new gift." "And who says so?" asked their leader, a man with hair thinned to string and a mouth like a gash in a shriveled apple. "I do," John said, "by the Queen's writ, by the Watch's seal, by stark law. Freer men than you have tried to tell me where I stand. The man's eyes were quick and bright with that meanness hunger breeds. "There's squash down the crofts now. I smelled it. Maybe a goat, maybe a girl, maybe both. I've a taste for both. You say I can't take them? I say," John said, and the old words rose in him, older than his father, but his father had worn them well. "You cannot take what is another's by force. I say the penalty for rape is death. I say the penalty for murder is death. I say I am the one who must do the deed when I name the doom." The words felt heavy and right. His breath made a little fog. "If you come down from that fold and walk away, we will not chase you. If you try to go toward the croft, we will stop you. If you run, we will run faster. If you fight, you will die." "Will I?" The man's eyes flicked to Tormund. "What will you do, wild man? Cut me in half and eat me raw?" "I've eaten stews of worse," Tormund said. He raised his axe and then settled it on his shoulder like a farmer at leisure. "But raw is for a wolf with no teeth. I prefer to chew." Hela said nothing. Hela knocked and drew, and her arrow thrummed, and the limping man bellowed and sat suddenly as if the ground had gone soft under him, clutching at his leg where the shaft quarried. It had gone clean through the meat of the calf. "That's a warning," John said. "There's another. It's sharper. You've no right." The leader's mouth thinned. "No right. I have a sword," John said. "That's a right older than any writ." In the end, they came off the fold, but not toward the croft. They went west, hopping on the limping man's grunted count, each mutter a timekeeping to keep their courage up. John stood until they had gone, until the dark of them blurred into the pale blur of winter wood, and all that remained was the blood-black drops on the snow where the limper had bled and the wind had not yet scoured it. There would be more. Men came as wolves came, in ones and twos, and then in packs when the first had tasted blood. A man could not hold the snow from the door by wish. He needed walls slightly higher than the tallest man, ditches weeded like gardens so there were no nettles to tangle in, platforms for archers, fields that had room for lines of men to run and not stumble over the old plow furrows. He needed a law men would believe in. That night, John sat by a fire so small it looked like a joke at the middle of the first field. Snow blew in a coming squall, and sparks lifted and died. Around him, the free folk murmured, a hum like the sound of a hive when it settles into summer. They had no wine. The ale had gone to the watch first. A woman with a face like a hawk's skull sang of a river that once ran to the great sea, and no one knew what sea she named or where it had been. But the song fell on them like dream. "Laws?" Val said, squatting across from him with her mantle thrown back, the fire painting her cheeks. "You speak that word a great deal. You want them to put their faces in that yoke. They will not." "Law is not a yoke," John said. "Law is the rope on a skiff that keeps you tied to a place when the wind comes so you don't find yourself on rocks." "I've never been on a skiff," Val said. "But I've been on rocks." "All right, Stark. Say your laws." He drew them out like nails he meant to hammer. There were as many as a man might carry in one hand. Guest right bound all. There would be no taking of women or men unwilling. There would be no killing without a hearing and a sentence. There would be a tithe in kind to the watch. There would be a tithe in labor to raise walls and ditches. 2 days of each man's hands in every 7 until the first thaw broke and the fields could take a plow. There would be marshals to ride the border in pairs, one kneeler and one free, to answer for the other's justice. There would be a moot once each moon at the ruined village east of the well with the lightning-scarred beach for arbitration. 3 chosen from among the free folk, 3 from among the small folk who settled or would settle, with John to break ties unless he sent an elder of the watch in his stead. There would be a hayas on him as binding as any oath. The man who passed sentence must swing the steel himself, without delegation, unless the condemned were a lord or a lady or the watch demanded its own justice within its walls. There would be no lord's levy upon the folk of the gift save a call for defense when the gift itself stood threatened. Every child born under the beach or within the bounds of the crofts would belong to the new gift as well as to its mother and father, and at 7 the child could be sent south to foster with a house that swore to the queen in the north or kept as the family chose. Those who fostered would learn letters and measure and numbers, and any who returned north at 14 would come with half what they'd learned still inside them and the other half shaking loose like teeth. They would not be made kneelers by it. They would be made good traders. Good traders fed their own. "These are good laws," Val said when he was done. "Short. I can keep them in my head, which is where laws should be kept. Laws that must live in books are already dead." "But," her smile flicked, "the marshals, there will be trouble." "I mean there to be trouble," John said. "A man rides better when his partner will judge him at the moot if he goes too far." "Your father would love you for that," said Tormund, who had listened with his eyes closed as if the law were a song. "He would also tell you that men grow fond of what they do often. A man who rides to judge grows fond of judging. He must be taken off the horse every so often to remember the ground is what we all stand on." "He'll serve a year," John said. "Then one winter in the fields like any man. It won't be perfect. Nothing is. That's how we know it's real." Tormund stretched. The fire made him look larger, his beard a bush in flame. "Set your moot, boy. Call your kneelers and you're free. We'll talk and spit and curse one another and agree or pretend to. That's how people are made." The ruined village with the lightning-scarred beach had once had a name, but if any man knew it now, he pretended not to. They called it the Queen's Crown because there was an old watchtower that rose from it with a top like a circlet of stones, half fallen, which the sun could sometimes make glitter and lie as if jewels were set there. The first moot was held there when the snow fell heavy, and the air smelled of smoke and old pie someone had baked months ago and wrapped in linen and carried in the hope of a celebration they could not yet define. They came, north and south, lords and men who had no lord, and women who did not wait for men to speak for them. The Umbers sent a cousin of a cousin with a face like leather boiled and left to dry, who swore oft but with a kind of affection. White Harbor sent a seal seller with inked hands and cold in his eyes, sent by Lord Manderley's steward with a purse of iron coins and a list of promises. The watch sent a maester wearing black who moved as if the cold were something he wrestled with inside his own skin, a thin smile like a knife edge. And from the free folk came elders and the young alike, clad in fur and leather and pride, with beads of bone in their hair and scars like written stories on their knuckles. Val sat with the free folk and did not speak until the last, and then she spoke sharp. John read the Queen's writ, though he had no need. The words were well known now from being passed hand to hand, copied in poor strokes and better by the hands of maesters and village septons who had nothing to do in the winter but scribe and keep warm. He spoke the laws again, and that was well, and then he listened. The Umber wanted the border drawn firm and recognized. "I don't have boys to send chasing thieves through snow," the man said. "Tell me where my land begins and I'll keep it. Tell me where it ends and I won't overstep. Push me and I'll push back hard and then we're all frostbit." He looked over the free folk as if they were timber to be priced. "I want the first right to buy furs." "You'll get the second," Val said. "The first is ours." "Your law talks of a tithe to the watch," the seal seller from White Harbor said. 10 of 100 in kind. Who counts? Who judges whether a man's 10 is 10 or 9? There must be measure. "The watch counts," the black maester said. "But a thing counted by a hungry man may be larger than its shape. We should appoint talliers not sworn to us and sworn to the crown. Let them carry the bar of ash marked by an inch and count by it. Let 2 be chosen each moon, 1 free and 1 knee-bent. Let them swear the night before." He coughed and smiled thin. "When men swear together, they feel bound by the air between them." "And if they lie?" cried a voice from the back, some crofter who'd crept in at the edges with a wool cap pulled low over bad ears. "Then they shall both be put to choosing between the cold and the rope and one another," the maester said. "And I would be there to watch." "Sounds south," Tormund said, and then shrugged. "But measuring is like drinking. Men do it wrong without practice." In the afternoon the wind rose, and the snow that had fallen all morning started to run in streamers along the ground, letting the old mud show in places like a scab peeled back to fresh skin. The mood argued and spat, and one man punched another and was pulled away by 2 women who laughed and cuffed his ears until he laughed too, red with it. But by the time a pale sun showed through the broken tower's crown, They had named 4 marshals, Hela Blackthumb for the free, a young Umber, a brother from the watch who had never shot a man and did not want to, and a crofter with a missing eye who gave solid answers and never too many words. They had named a pair of talliers and invented a ritual for their swearing that involved a candle, a pinch of salt, and a bite of bread that was never more than 1 bite and never less. They had marked the boundary with an oath toward the trees and a promise to place stones where summer would show them, and they had agreed the Queen's writ would be read at every moot until the words wore grooves in all their ears and made pathways in their thoughts. When dusk came, Val rose, and the hall, which was no hall, only the open work of the ruined tower with its old stone and old iron, went quiet as if the snow had smothered it. "I will say this once," she said. "No free man will kneel here. We do not kneel. Your queen may wear furs and have hair the color of a fox and blood like a wolf, but she is your queen. She is not ours. We will be bound by our word. We will be bound by guest right and by the promise of our hands and by our hunger for our children to live. That is enough." "It is," John said, standing, and for a moment he felt the strange double sight come over him. The sense of the boy who had hidden behind pillars to watch his Lord Father pass judgment in Winterfell, and of the man who had stood on the wall with the dead at his back and the living before him. It is enough. The first months were the worst. That was the way of all things. Men can live with much if you give them a before and an after. It is the during that bites. The snow deepened and the river, sluggish before, locked tight, blue and white like stone. Men broke axes trying to cut holes in it. Women gave birth and babies came out so quiet it seemed they had already learned from winter not to waste breath. A man from the croft 2 ridges overstole a goat from the new pens the free folk had bound with withy and force. He said he had been hungry and he had a son as thin as a bowstring to feed. John asked the moot. The moot told him to season his mercy, but to salt it with sense. He cut off 2 fingers quick as coin and gave him a sack of oats and a place in the work line with Hele and her crew mending the wall of Mudgeon's tumble. "You won't steal with 3 fingers, Hele told the man, and smacked the sack of oats into his chest with a smile that had no softness in it. "Make your boy a stew." A band from farther south tried the border again in the second moon. They came hard and quiet in the dead part of the night when even wolves lay their heads down, and they slashed a guard's cheek open to the bone before the horn sounded. John's men, free and small folk both, spilled out, and Val was with them with a spear as long as a man and as supple as a willow, and Hela had a rope she had tied with a trick knot that took 3 men to loose. They took 2 of the raiders alive, a boy and the leader. The boy could not have been 12. "He's small for 12, said one of the free women. "He's small for 8. "He's 12, the boy said, shaking and snot-nosed with the frost. "I had a knife." "You had a toy," Tormund said. "Toys cut too." He looked at John. "Well, who will swing? The man is yours. The boy is the world's. We don't belong to the world." John thought of winter and of the way small things die because great things lumber and do not notice them. He thought of a different boy once with a bastard's right to take the long way round Winterfell because the straight path ran by where the lady stood with her sons. He had learned rules then, some hard, some soft. He had learned to find the places between. He took the leader to the beach with the lightning scar, and the tree stood with its bloody face watching as if the old gods took a pleasureless pleasure in men being men. He read the law slow so it would settle. He told the man what he had done. He told him the price. He took off his head with one stroke. The world is simple in that single moment from steel raised to steel dropped, he thought after. Before it is complicated. After it is complicated. It is only simple while the blade falls. He took the boy in hand after. "Eat," he told him, taking him back to the byre where the old straw had been refreshed with new and smelled faintly of summer. "You had a knife. You have no father now. You'll serve one." The boy set his shoulders like a man with a stubborn goat. "I don't kneel. I don't ask you to. I ask you to work. You want to eat? There's a dike that leaks when the thaw comes, and we mend it before the thaw so it will be strong by the time it must be. And you'll learn figures from the maester once a week. And you'll knock your temper on a tree and not at a man." "Why?" The boy's mouth was fierce. Why take me? Why not send me away? Why care? Because I want you, John said simply. Because you will be useful here. Because if I do not want you, someone else will, and that man will want you for a reason I might not like. The boy looked at him a long time in a silence heavy with the weight of a boy trying not to let the world's mercy make him cry. He nodded once, quick. Fine, he said. I'm called not. Because of this. He held up his right hand, where the little finger was knuckled over oddly, twisted since birth, the joint too swollen for a boy. Like a knot in a rope. Then not you'll be, John said. And you'll untie yourself by the time the thaw comes, if you listen. Come. Hela's hungry for new hands. She'll bite if you slack. They ate wolves when they had to, that winter. Sometimes wolves eat men. Sometimes men eat wolves. Wolves came hungry out of the pines with snow on their backs and yellow in their eyes, and Ghost would stand with his fur lifted and a little growl in his throat, and the wolves would slink back, something in them recognizing something in him. On a single night in the 3rd month, the sky cleared so suddenly it was as if a lid had been lifted off the world, and the stars were bright enough to cast tiny, cold shadows where the snow lay smooth. Men woke from lightless sleep to look up and feel small and comforted by it in the same breath. In the southeast, a faint green drapery fluttered, the northern lights seen far south of where they are queen, and all the children laughed because it felt like a story had come down from a grandam's tongue to float above their fields. Letters came with ravens whose wings beat the air like flensed fish. One from Queen Sansa in her precise hand and iron the color of night in her ink. She sent news. White Harbor had freed grain at a cost that could be paid in furs and fish if the next 2 seasons were no worse than this one. Lady Barbary Dustin had died at Barrowton, leaving her riders unsettled as ants thrown from their hill. The Glovers had settled their old grudge with a marriage and 3 days of feasting that would be remembered until men remembered something else. She wrote with a sister's dryness and a queen's weight. She wrote that he had her trust. She closed with, "You were my brother before I was anyone else, before we were what we are now. When you swing, I swing. When you eat, I eat. Winter belongs to all of us, and summer does too." He turned the parchment over once and kept it in the sleeve by his wrist where he could touch it and feel that the world still had a pulse that was not merely his. A different letter came stamped with the ribbon of the royal wheel and sealed with Bran's sign. Hers was a direwolf. His a wheel that looked like a child's toy until one considered its weight. He bid John send south any folk who were guilty of crimes the crown had not pardoned, if such folk would face the king's justice. He bid John take counsel of Samwell Tarly when he could, for his old friend had become a true maester at the Citadel and would be sent north in time when the roads were passable. John read it and smiled and frowned in the same breath. He had missed Sam most in the moments when a joke would have kept the world from cracking, and no one had spoken one. Work was the daily prayer. They moved from Mudgeon's Tumble to a holding that had once belonged to a family who had died in a spring flood many years ago and left the house perched like a ship stranded when a sea receded. They named it Shipstead, and it had a view of the low valley where in summer wildflowers would come. They trapped, fished, ate. They took ice from the river and stored it under straw, thinking of summer as one thinks of a god, doubtful but hopeful. The first 2 babies born in the gift that season lived and took on their mother's milk with a slow, stubborn greed, and a woman laughed when the second child bit her hard and said, "That's a good one. That's a child who wants to live." They found in an old watch hut, buried under drifted snow and the leavings of rats, a barrel of nails so well made that even after years the points bit smooth and true into wood. John felt as if he'd found treasure. He would have traded gold for those nails. With nails and patience, a man could make walls that stood even when hope slept. A 3rd band came at the thaw, and this one was not broken men. They were men under a flag, a ragged flag still, but a banner nonetheless. Over whitewashed, flayed men, the new scrawl had been redrawn, cleaner, deliberate. 3 slashes, not careless but meaningful. Their leader had a name, Hotherslade, and a claim to lands that had once been held by men who had sworn to the Dreadfort. He had 50 men and 20 boys, and the sort of pride men wear like armor when they have no armor. He sent a man under a rag of parley and offered terms. The free folk would pay to pass through his lands. If they refused, he would show them that the law south of the King's Road was his. John met him beyond the beach, because a man who chooses his ground chooses the ending of his story oftener than not. He took Tormund, Hela, Not, who had grown taller in the months, as boys do when they are fed and worked hard, and 2 of the marshals. The watch sent the maester because he said a book would hold him up as well as a sword, and he could read men better than most could read cart marks. "Stark," Hotherslade said, and spat on the snow. "They say the queen has made you so. Bastard Stark is what I heard. I say bastard. Bastard. Bastard." He grinned with brown teeth when the words did not draw blood from John. "You shelter wild men. You bring wolves to the fold. You call yourself steward, but you'll sit a chair before you die." "I sit when I am tired," John said. "I stand when I need standing. Your men look cold. Do you want stew before we speak? You offer me food?" Hotherslade's eyes gleamed. "You think that makes you a lord. Lord feeds. Lord takes. I'll take what you offer and take more. If you take without my leave, you'll die without my leave," John said. "But eat. A man makes poorer words when his belly gnaws his back." He nodded to Hela. She had already sent a boy running. Free folk crowded and watched. Small folk crowded and watched. He could feel the moot coalescing without the forms, the air thick with waiting. Ghost paced at the edge of the world, his tail a white scribble against the black trees. They brought out stew and bread. Hotherslade ate and then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You make a good lord," he said, sneering. "Your roads will run with blood anyway. This is my land. My grandsire held it. Bolton took it, and when the last scraped flesh from those bones, I took it back. I ride. I judge. I find men who break my law. I hang them. I find women who won't pay their tithe. I take from them and deliver justice." He smiled as if the word were sweet in his mouth. "You won't hang. I think I'll take your hand and send you south to your red-haired queen with a bundle of law where your hand used to be." "You will not take my hand," John said. "You may try." He looked at the man until the winter itself leaned forward to listen. "Hotherslade, your law is not law. It is theft. You are no lord. Your sigil is a boy's scratch, and your pride is a dead man's coat you stole because you were cold. The gift was granted to the watch. The queen protects it. I serve it. You are beyond the law here. You may turn and ride south. You may strip your banner and return as a farmer or a trapper or a man who can fish. Or you may be a memory by dusk." "Memory?" Slade snorted. "I'll put you in a song." Jon Snow the Crow, who thought he was a wolf and found he was a lamb. "Not," Jon said softly without turning his head. "If I fall, blow the horn twice. If I stand, blow it once." "I'll blow it never," Not said, at once and stubborn. "You don't fall." "I have," Jon said, with a flicker of something like humor in his eyes. "And gotten up again." He drew Longclaw and held it level, its pale edge steady. "Hotherslade, come and be judged. Men are made of many things. In the south they book them with lines and names and the color of the ribbon tied around a newborn's wrist to mark him as one who will inherit. In the north they mark them with deeds. Hotherslade had more men, and his men had trained in hunger and spite. Jon had beside him a giant of a free man who laughed before he killed, and a woman who tied knots no man could loose after she was done. He had a boy who was proud and hungry for approval. He had a maester with a mind like a knife used for paring apples and peeling truth. He had the law and a winter wind that cut equally. He had the queen's writ, yes, but that was only a paper, and paper burns. He had ghost pacing. He had his own back set straight by boys' training and men's wars. They fought on the snow crust, and it broke, and they stumbled, and the fight turned to a grapple more than a dance. Snow rose in mouths and eyes, and it tasted of cold water and old iron. Longclaw bit and sang. Hela's rope whipped and caught, and a man fell with a strangled noise like a broken flute. Tormund laughed and shoved, and a rider pitched from his saddle into the hard white with a thud. Not ran and blew the horn once, then once again, and a third time of his own will when he saw Jon knocked to a knee and a boot raised to crush his hand. The horn was shrill and coarse and brave. Hotherslade came for Jon, and he was quick, quicker than pride suggested. His blade was red-tinted at the hilt, some smith's joke at his flayed forebears, and it moved smooth. Their steel met and stuck and slid. John felt his arm jar and the old ache in his ribs twinge. He let the pain be pain and not something else. He stepped forward when Slade thought he would step back. He brought his knee up. He took a cut on the back of his arm to get inside. He felt Longclaw grind a long chain and then stumble over a gap. He put his weight on his blade. They went down. Blood made a bright mouth on the snow. It steamed softly like a breath in the cold. Hother Slade's mouth made a shape as if to speak and then did not. John put his blade down and did not lift it again. He was panting, and his breath went up and fell around him like a veil. He stood. He waited for the shaking after. The shaking came, small as a shiver and then larger, and he let it pass. "Gather them," he said, and his voice came out steady because it had been taught to be steady when he was a boy and men were still alive who had made a habit of steadiness. "Those who surrender will live. Those who run, let them go south. Those who fight, put them under the tree." He made it quick. He always made it quick. He learned that from his father and from men who taught him when to be gentle and when to be a sharp edge. He did not do it to be cruel. He did not do it to be kind. He did it to make a statement the world could not misunderstand. The free folk watched with faces like walls. The small folk watched with faces like doors half open. The watch's maester watched with that thin smile. Tormund watched with his hand on Not's shoulder. Val watched with her spear but on the ground and her head cocked like a hawk's, interested. When he was done, he washed his hands in a basin of snow water until his skin went numb and red. He wrapped his arm where the cut lay, and he ate a heel of bread because one must make the ordinary stand next to the extraordinary or the extraordinary burns you. He sent a man to White Harbor with the rumor that the path was safe to carry grain north again. He sent another to Carhold with a letter to Sigourney and Alice Karstark, because he had heard that they had made a marriage brave enough to warm a cold room, and he wanted their counsel. People who had made a bridge across a river so wild as that might counsel a man building piers in a different current. He sent a small pouch to the watch with their tithe counted and tied with a strip of red cloth, because the color gladdened him and reminded him that even in winter some things were bright. Spring came late. When it came like a man who had forgotten his hat and came back, embarrassed but resolved. The snow melted in slow slots and left the fields looking furred with brown wool. The beach's scar bled sap that ran yellow and sticky. Men took off one layer of fur and then put it on again as if to apologize to the wind. Frogs sang in ditches, and children that had not been born crying now cried to hear them, not knowing why the small rough voices in the water made their chests feel strange. The first furrow cut was not straight. It did not need to be. It was a furrow. It was the first. Oxen pulled. Men grunted. Women sang because singing keeps men upright. Hela cursed the plow and then kissed it, laughing, as if it were a stubborn lover she had finally coaxed from a sulk. John went south to Winterfell that spring because a steward must report. He went with Tormund and Val and Not and two of the marshals because a man arriving with no witnesses arrives without proof he has lived. Ghost went at his side, white and tall, and the way people made way for them in the yard when they arrived was a small thing, but it put a steadying hand on John's heart. Winterfell smelled of smoke and boiled leather and damp stone warmed by sun. In the Godswood, the red leaves had begun to open like mouths. The heart tree knew him. He felt the knowing move over his skin, a cold that was not of air. Sansa greeted him in the great hall with the old stark words and a sister's eyes. She wore a mantle of pale gray sewn with small white leaves that moved when she walked as if a wind had trapped itself in her clothing. Beside her stood men who were loyal and men who were useful and men who were both. She had learned to gather both. She kissed him on the cheeks, north and south, and stood back to look and smiled with pride and sorrow both. "Brother," she said, "you've grown thinner and more certain. I don't know if I like either." "I'll eat while I'm here," he said. "You will," she said, and for a moment they were boy and girl standing in a yard in autumn with wind that smelled of fallen leaves and old apples pressed into the ground and the sound of metal on wood from the training yard. They spoke for a day and a night. Sansa knew the north like a map that moved with blood. She had learned where men would bend and where they would break, and which to leave bent and which to reset. She listened to Jon with her chin in her palm, and her eyes flicked toward Val with interest and then away with calculation that was not unkind. She liked Val. She liked Tormund in the way one likes a wild dog who has decided to sleep by the fire. She liked not most of all because he tried not to look at her and failed and then scowled when he failed, and it made her think of old days when a boy had scowled at her and she had loved him for his scowl and hated him for it and then loved him again. "You need grain," she said when the talk turned to numbers and not to hope. "White Harbor can send it. It will be dear, but it will be less dear than losing men you have made work over a winter and trained into belief. Men are coin too, Jon, and you are rich in them because of how you spend them. You speak like a lord and a traitor both," Tormund told her, grinning under his beard. "You'll do. I speak like a woman who must keep a hall standing when the wind would take it," she said dry. "Men speak of war. Women speak of weather and grain. Those are the same talk if a person has ears." She offered him a chair in the Northern Council. He refused it. He asked instead that she name, in public and with the hall listening, that the law in the gift was law and that any man who crossed it with defiance would be judged here as if he had struck her under her own roof. She gave him that gift. She put a sword in his hands before the assembled and put her hand on the blade and said, "You are my steward in the new gift. When you pass doom, I pass doom. When you feed, I feed." The hall murmured. Some smiled. Some looked angry. It was fine. Anger at a woman's power is the background noise of the world. It meant nothing more than all the other noises men pulled up when they were startled by something new. When he left, she put her hands on his face and looked into him as if he were a book that had been left out in the damp and needed careful coaxing open. "You carry too much," she said, softly so the others could not hear. "Give some of it back to me. I am built to carry." "I know," he said, and he realized he had always known that about her and that he had forgotten because the world had made her into something else for a time. "I know." On the way back, Jon stopped at a small hill where the snow had melted first, and he looked north. The wall glinted faintly, a low line of unnatural brightness, as if a god had drawn a chalk mark on the horizon. Between here and there lay 100 stories. He felt them run under his feet like old water under ice. He felt tired and glad and afraid, which is how a man knows he is a man. The summer they called summer came as a rumor first and then as a fact. It rained for 3 days at a time and then 4 days and then there were 3 days of sun in a row, and men took off shirts to feel the light on their shoulders and cried when they felt it because the melting cold in their bones had felt permanent. The fields gave back grain enough to be called grain and not hope. The fish ran in the river. The marshals rode and came back with small reports. There were men poaching at the east border who had once been men of a house that had had a name and now had lost it. They were shown the boundary stones and left their rabbit snares and went away because they did not want to be the sort of men who argued with stones. Stranger things came too because the world will send you the thing you have not thought about to test your balance. A woman arrived wearing southern silks, too thin for the wind, with a ring in her lip and a little girl who had hair pale as straw that had been left too long in the sun. The woman said she had come from the Stormlands and that there were begin-agains there, hardy folk who would trade knowledge for a place to stand. "We know about making walls of branches so the wind leaves the snow where the wall is and not on your house," she said brightly. "We call them snow fences. We learned it from a man from the mountains who courted me until I married him. Then he died, but I kept the fences. We call them the same," Hela said. "Stay, live, same for all." The woman stayed. The girl learned to climb the beach and was scolded and then praised and then scolded again, as such girls are. The Night's Watch sent a boy who had been a boy of the Iron Islands once, and who had a salt wind in him and a way with boats that made men listen even though this was no coast and his boats were small skiffs on the river. He taught men to ride the current and not fight it. He taught them to set lines where the shadow of the trees fell on the water and to move them when the wind shifted. He taught them to make a fish stew with pepper that would clear a man's lungs of sorrow for an hour. He taught them to sing in a deep voice, a simple rolling chant like oars moving. The free folk laughed and then sang too, because a good song is as contagious as a sickness in a close hall and more welcome. In the second winter, the gift did not starve. It did not feast, but it did not starve. John caught himself smiling in the morning just because the smoke from 100 hearths lay in the valley like a shawl on someone he loved. He had not expected to feel this smallness that felt like largeness, this belonging that was not a roof over his head but a sense the land knew him, as the heart tree knew him. He had been many things: a boy unloved by a lady, a brother of a black order that was older than most kingdoms, a lover in a cave with red hair all around him like autumn itself wrapped around his heart, a king in the mouth of men and a traitor at the tip of a knife and a ghost. He had not been a steward in the old sense, the sense of standing and tending and mending. Val kissed him once that winter, on a night when the aurora shook loose its green ribbons above the beach, and her mouth tasted of cold and something like pine. She did not say anything afterward. She grinned and went to argue with Hele about whether a fence should run north-south or east-west to catch the drifting snow more cleverly. Later she came to him a second time and did not kiss him and said, "I like you. I will dodge you and then come to you and then dodge you again. If I want more, I will say. I have always told men what I want. It is simpler. I do not know if I could be a husband," John said. "I do not know if I should." She squinted at him, amused. "Husband? Is that the word for a man you lay with in the South? We do not take words like we take lovers. We keep them long. You can be John. That is enough." She lifted his hand and looked at the half-moons the cold had made of his knuckles. "You will die early. You will grow old. You will live. Those are all likely. You could have all three. I will have some of whatever you have. I am hungry." He laughed then because she made him. He did not laugh much. He liked the sound of it in his own throat. Trouble came as it must, but it came smaller, like a dog snapping at a heel. A boy of the gift stabbed a free man in a dice game with a bone splinter. The man's heart lay too close to his skin, and he died with his eyes angry and surprised. They brought the boy to the moot. He was 12. 12 is the age of wolves and saints and liars and boys who want to be men before they should. John listened. He watched the mother's hands twist and then be still because she was too tired for grief's gesture. He sentenced the boy to serve 1 year in the watch. "You will learn discipline," he said. "You will learn hunger and how to make it wait its turn. You will learn to read. You will come back when the summer comes again, and you will be a man who can make dice with his hands and not throw them at another's throat." The watch took him, a boy carrying a burden lighter than rope and heavier than truth. The mother wept when she was alone and not before. John was not always fair. He was not always wise. He knew it and set his teeth on it and swallowed it like bitter medicine. Once he refused the moot when a matter touched him too closely, because a man should not judge a man who had bedded with a woman who had kissed him in last winter's aurora. Once he cut a man too quickly for a theft and afterward sat alone at the beach and put his head to the bark and told the old gods aloud, "I wronged him. I can't mend it, but I can be better." Once he took 3 days to answer a letter from Sansa because her words had angered him. Then he wrote back and began with, "I was angry. You were right to say it. A man who can say a wrong can sometimes keep from doing it the next time and sometimes not, but saying is a help even when it feels like weakness." He never went south of Winterfell again. The world narrowed and sharpened. Men in Old Town wrote books about the others and the cold magic, and singers in King's Landing made japes about the man who had given wild men kitchens. It did not reach him, or if it did, it fell off him like hoarfrost from a branch when the sun rises. He had Ghost. He had the beach. He had the Queen's writ. He had the law. He had people who came to him at dawn and at dusk and at times between with small things and large. You cannot always tell when you are changing the world. It is not loud. The loud things are usually only the sounds of men wanting others to notice them. He did not think of the world changing when the first fosterlings came back from south with letters and numbers in their heads and the free way of looking at a stranger without looking down. He did not think of the world changing when a ship from White Harbor came up as far as the river would take it and bartered iron shovels for furs and glass beads and a song taught to them by the boy from the Iron Islands. He did not think of the world changing when two marshals married, one kneeler and one free, and the moot argued for an hour about whether their children counted as both and then decided yes, which meant nothing and meant everything. He did not think of the world changing when the watch sent a letter of thanks for the steady tithe and a poem that made Hella blush and hide it under a plank. He did not think of the world changing when the free folk began to use the word we about men who had once called them raiders. He did not think of the world changing when a woman from the croft who had hated the free because 3 men had taken her sister 20 years ago stood at a boy's bier and held Val's hand while they watched the fire. He thought of the world when the 3rd summer brought a harvest that was fat, and men in Winterfell came north to see. Sansa came again and stood at the edge of Shipstead and watched the children running with sticks and ribbons and the dogs chasing them and the oxen standing abroad like ships in a new port. She listened to Val argue with a man about whether his ditch was too shallow and then watched them take spades and measure and laugh and dig. She stood under the beech and looked up at the scar and said to Jon, "It bled lightning and did not break." "Neither did we," he said. "You didn't," she said. She put her head on his shoulder as if she had carried too many things that day and could put some down there. "I am glad the world has this. There are places that break and must be left to be ruins. There are places that should be rebuilt with new plans. This is a place that remembers and goes on. Father would like that. Father would tell me I should have hung a man I cut fingers from," he said, smiling. "Then he would have told me I did right. He always managed both." "He did," she said. "Sometimes I hated him for it. He was more honest than comfort." "So are you," Jon said. She pinched his arm with a small childhood cruelty that had survived everything. "Don't flatter me before supper. It will make me unruly." At dusk they feasted. It was not a castle's feast. It was better. Men ate with their hands and laughed with their whole faces and spilled beer and cleaned it with their palms and drank the foam from their fingers. Val danced with Hela and then with Sansa, and Sansa's mantle moved as if the leaves sewn into it wanted to be trees. Tormund wove a story so large it could hardly fit inside the sky and told it small, as if he were whispering so the gods would not overhear and grow jealous. Not stared at a girl, and the girl stared at Not, and the old woman with the hawk skull face elbowed them both until they stood and went to where the moonlight fell through the branches in a coin. The maester sang his chant, and the Iron Islands boy beat a slow rhythm on the bottom of a kettle with 2 spoons, and it sounded like the sea in a place where no sea was. Later, when the fire was low and the stars lay like spilled salt and the aurora had not come, Jon stood alone by the beach and touched the bark where the lightning scar ran. He had not asked for this life. He had asked for a simpler one and received a harder. He dreamed sometimes of the cave. He dreamed sometimes of the sound the wall made in deeper night. He dreamed sometimes of nothing at all, and when he woke after those dreams he felt rested as he had not in years. Ghost pressed his head against Jon's hip, a solid warmth. "You always bring me to ground," Jon told the wolf. "Even when looking up is easier." Ghost huffed, a small doggish thing that made Jon smile. The wolf lifted his head then, ears pricked. Jon heard it a breath later, the drum of hoofbeats, more than one, with a hurriedness to them that meant one thing: news. In the gift, news mattered. It mattered everywhere. But here it mattered as a man's life matters when winter is your judge. The riders came into the square hard and drew up with steaming horses. The lead had the look of a man who had ridden since noon and missed meals by 2. He swung down and went to a knee without thinking. Then he stood too quickly, embarrassed. "Steward," he said, awkward on the title as a new boy is awkward with a bow. "There's smoke. East border. Stones overturned." The marshals came upon 3 men hanging. "The stones are stones. They pissed on them." "Whose banner?" Jon asked. "None," the man said. "Or all. They had their sigils on their skin in ink. One had a man flayed, old. One had a knife on a hand, new. One had a wheel." Jon's throat tightened before his mind caught up. It eased when it did. "Not our wheel," he said. "Men draw wheels because they are simple. They do not know the weight of them. The road. Empty now, but there's ash. Something burned long enough to make ash. Did we fight a night? I would say, only we did not." "No," Jon said, and he turned to the beach again. because it steadied him to have something older than himself fill his sight. We will not be baited. We will mend the stones. We will bury the men. We will not let anger draw us out to where no one stands behind us. Who then? The rider asked, baffled and young. If not anger? If not speed? Care, John said. Care is a slower horse, but it doesn't throw you when the ford is deeper than you thought. Saddle up.
Tormund, helle, noit.
We go at first light. Maester, right to the queen. Say some men think the gift is theirs to piss on. Ask her what she thinks of that. She will think that men often piss on what they love and then pretend it was rain, the maester said dryly. But I will write it in a hand more suited to the crown. He smiled, thin and weary and content. We are a place now, Jon Snow. Men know where we are. We are, Jon said. He felt, then, not the weight of all he had carried but the sharing of it. Sansa south of him like a fence in a good place, Val beside him like a spear and a laugh, the watch in their old stone like an old man who knows the value of stew, Tormund like a storm at his back that he had learned to walk in without being blown away, not like a boy who would be a man sooner than anyone would prefer and yet in his proper time. He slept. He slept the sleep of a man who will be needed and knows that he will be sufficient. In the morning they rode with the sun in their faces and the frost on the grasses like a spider's web thrown over the land, and they mended stones, and they buried men, and they fixed fences. The world did not burn that day. It might burn another. He would be there. The law would stand as men stand, shivering sometimes but standing. Years later, when men told the story of how the new gift became a place with a name that made men straighten slightly and a map mark that had a weight to it, they did not tell it with the splash of a battle hymn or the roll of a march. They told it the way men tell you about a neighbor whose fence was always in good repair, and whose children had straight backs, and whose dogs did not bite men for walking past. Sometimes they told the part about Hotherslade. Sometimes they told the part about Val. Often they told the part about Sansa because women like to have queens in their stories and men like it too, even when they pretend they do not. Most of the time, they told the part where winter was long and then it wasn't, and where the first furrow could have been straighter but was beautiful because it was first, and where a man stood and did not pretend to be anything but a steward, which is to say, a man who holds on until it is time to pass it on, and does not put his own name on the thing but only his hand. Jon grew older. His hair grayed in cold streaks at his temples before it grayed anywhere else, the way frost takes the tips of a pine before it takes the whole. He cut fewer heads and more bread. He went to the beach when he could not sleep and remembered the day when the wall sighed like a sleeping thing and Tormund had made light of heaviness and Ghost's fur had cracked with ice. He remembered a cave. He remembered his father's hand on his shoulder and Ned Stark's voice saying nothing at all and saying everything in the same silence. He remembered a boy called not standing too straight in front of a queen and trying not to sway with the pride that ran up through him like sap in a beach. He remembered Val's laugh and Hela's rope and the maester's thin smile and Sansa's mantle moving like leaves in a private wind. On a day in a winter 20 years after the first furrow, he stood in the moot and a girl argued with him. She had a nose that looked too small for her face and hair that had never seen a comb willingly. She told him his ditch was wrong. He listened. He decided she was right. He said so aloud and smiled because a man who can say a girl is right is a man who has made a world he would like to live in. At dusk, he went to the beach. The scar was older and deeper and yet less fierce. That happens to scars. He touched it. The bark was cold and then, under the cold, alive. He thought he heard the old gods, or perhaps only the wind in red leaves the color of blood and autumn. He told them, "We held it, you and I. We held it." Ghost leaned right then into his hip as if in answer, and somewhere above the broken crown of the old tower, a ribbon of green showed in the sky for a breath and was gone, as if the world had winked at him and gone back to work. He laughed, soft. He went back to work too.